Good morning, everyone. I'm glad to see a lot of people are here on a cold day. Things are happening at a very fast rate in Egypt, and what we're going to try to do today is just try to shed some light about some of the issues regarding what is going on in Egypt, but also implications for the region and implications for U.S. policy. I have with me Marina Ottaway, the director of the Middle East program in Washington, and Michelle Dunn, our senior associate and an expert and a scholar on Egypt. We also have, hopefully, with us Amr Hamzawi, who is in Cairo right now, in Tahrir Square, and what we will try to do is to dial in and hopefully get to talk to him. He would be able to give us a first-hand account of what is going on, but also help us understand what will happen in the future. So, I don't know, Jessica, if we're ready to call Amr, or let's see if we can get him. It might be noisy, but I don't know what that means, but
it does not sound good. Okay.
There you have it. Well, okay, we'll keep trying, and the minute we get Amr, we'll just interrupt whatever we're doing and hear him speak. I know Michelle has to leave sooner than the rest of us, so Michelle will start with talking about implications for U.S. policy regarding Egypt, but also regarding the region as a whole. So, Michelle.
Thank you very much, Marwan. Good morning. I think we're headed toward a critical moment with Egypt. I'll be very interested to hear what Amr has to say. There's a very large demonstration planned for tomorrow. So tomorrow or the next 24 to 48 hours might be the turnaround here one way or another. The United States in a difficult position here, no matter which way this thing goes. I don't think any of us right now see the demonstrators giving up or this petering out. So that means there are a couple of possible ways. I mean, one way is that there's a transition of some kind with all the risks that brings for Egypt and for the United States interests. The other possibility, which I really hope won't happen, would be a very forceful crackdown and all the bad things that brings. So either one of these paths is really going to be quite difficult to navigate.
Okay. All right, sorry, Michelle, but I think Amr is with us on the phone. Amr, can you hear me? This is Marwan.
Marwan, كيف حالك? I can hear you well.
Great. Well, we have a full room eagerly awaiting to hear your views, Amr, on what is going on. I thought we would start maybe by asking you if about your views about whether the opposition, has a face, whether there's any leadership emerging, or what is the situation out there, and maybe you can also comment on the demonstration that is supposed to happen tomorrow, a big demonstration, and what what implications that might have on what is going on.
Right, Marwan. Let me start by the second point. I am at Meydan al-Tahrir, and I have been here with thousands of Egyptians. I would say we have like 7,000-8,000. It's filling up. The number of protesting, demonstrating Egyptians is increasing in spite of the curfew, which had started, in fact, a few minutes ago. So let me tell you that everyone is more or less expecting the demonstration tomorrow to be as huge as the different demonstrations which took place last Friday. There are news that trains coming to Cairo from different places in Egypt are going to be stopped tomorrow in an attempt by the government to limit the number of demonstrators. But once again, I mean, I have never seen such a commitment by so many different Egyptians, really coming from all different walks of life and from different social backgrounds, to change the regime, to change the government. The second point, so I'm expecting a big demonstration tomorrow, which will add to the pressure, to the street pressures on the government. Now, the big question is twofold, to my mind. One is, has the opposition reached a consensus on a figure, on a face, or on a group? And the second component of that question is, has the regime made up its mind in terms of responding positively to the streets' demands? With regard to the first point, no. The opposition, and here I am referring to political parties as well as informal groups, as well as the Muslim Brotherhood, continues to be in a state of contestation, of parallel claims, with regard to representing the people, representing Egyptian citizens who basically made it all. And they remain in a situation of contestation with parallel claims. So which really minimizes their credibility out here. I've been talking to people since I came, and everyone is frustrated with Baradei's attempt to put himself forward, other figures attempt to minimize Baradei's credibility by saying, well, he was not part of it. I mean, this is going on a bit. But to my mind, it's quite normal. I mean, this has been happening everywhere else. We are in a moment of transition, and the street, to my mind, will push in the direction of unity among the opposition spectrum, even if it's going to take a few days. Second point, responsiveness and the responses of the regime, and here we really need you. And I'm addressing, of course, not only those representatives of the U.S. administration who might be in the room, but I'm addressing everyone else, experts on the Middle East, Arab Americans, Egyptian Americans. The response of the regime has been so far extremely slow and extremely disappointing. Now, slow, of course, you have been following it. Disappointing because the demands are, as you know, national unity government. The formation of the cabinet, which was just announced, is far from being representatives of different movements and Marwan, I'm being pulled in different directions by people here, so bear with me a bit. So and I haven't slept since 4 days, so I might be confusing and confused. So I hope you get something out.
It won't get you a bigger salary, Amr.
Right. Well, no. The question of salaries is minor. No, forget about that. So no. So what I'm saying is the response of the regime so far has been extremely slow and disappointing. The formation of the cabinet, which was just announced, to the great disappointment of everyone, is more or less not NDP, but primary establishment and ruling out any real opposition representation or any real representation of those who made the change in Egypt in the last days. Secondly, there are demands which are amend the constitution, dissolve the parliament, because the parliamentary elections for the two chambers, People's Assembly as well as the Shura Consultative Council, the elections have been rigged, so dissolve the parliament, create a national unity government and a constitutional assembly to amend the constitution and organize presidential and parliamentary elections in 6 months. This is sort of the safe transitional period which everyone is pushing for. Of course, you have some voices here, out there, and among the opposition saying, no, Mubarak will have to be put on trial. To my mind, this is not going to take us anywhere. We are pushing for a transitional period. I'm referring to intellectuals, writers, and representatives of different groups and parties. But the response of the government and the regime and Mubarak himself has been disappointing to a great extent. People are wondering, my last point, are wondering with regard to the U.S. role in all of what's happening. They are following it very closely. There is a degree, as you know, Marwan, of frustration with regard to the slowness of the U.S. response, and because up until now we haven't heard a clear word about the demands, dissolving the parliament, elections. Secretary Clinton addressed it yesterday. But amending the constitution in what way, and the safeguards which we need for free and transparent presidential and parliamentary elections. This is how it's going. People are determined to continue protesting and continue demonstrating, and I'm among them, until we reach a good end.
Amr, what is in your view, I mean, we hear a lot of views here in Washington, but what in your view are the chances of the Mubarak regime staying in power, and let's address this point.
Marwan, I mean, it's Egypt has changed already. I mean, this is not the country which we had before last Tuesday, and definitely before last Friday. And they will have to realize it. I mean, now, with regard to the regime, I guess we really have to be very specific. Those who are in command and in charge are primarily representatives of the military establishment. It's the army, which is on the ground, which basically saves the state after the chain of command within the Ministry of the Interior completely failed. It is the army which is saving and sustaining the regime, and we have Omar Suleiman as the vice president now. So it is the military establishment. It's up to the military establishment to to my mind, either do a safe and secure transition to democracy, following the Tunisian example, or Egypt making its own example, basically following all what we know, a bit of the old regime and a great deal of the new regime, addressing the main issue of amending the constitution, opening up the fiscal space. Because coming back to the question, Marwan, I'm sorry, of the opposition, one of the reasons for these parallel claims is that really no one has been out there in the streets since a very long time. So we do not know how to judge the popularity of al-Baradei or someone like Ahmed Zouail or movements or parties. So you need to open it up. You need to amend the constitution. I've been talking to everyone here and saying, well, let's focus on the procedures and the mix of the old and new. This is the only way for the regime to do a safe transition to democracy. The question is how quick they are going to make up their minds, because they have been responding very slow. And this is not a question of weeks, it's a question of days. So it's really upon the military establishment, Omar Suleiman and other key figures, to make up their minds and see how we can move all of us ahead into a transitional period, opening up the fiscal space to be contested freely and with international and domestic safeguards in presidential and parliamentary elections 6 months. And this way they will avoid sort of removing, which they will not accept, I'm referring to the military establishment, removing President Mubarak. He is the head of the, as of now, as the military ruler. He is the head of the military establishment, and of course, with his background, they regard him as their symbol, as their representative, so they might be willing to accept opening up the space and sort of moving beyond Mubarak in a post-Mubarak era in 6 months, but they will never accept Mubarak to be put on trial or be removed, as some, I guess, minor groups, I would say, are calling for.
Would they accept Suleiman to have the transition, Amr, in your view?
Yes. I mean, there are two great assets on General Suleiman's side. One, he is well accepted. I mean, he's not popular, but he is accepted and respected. People do not mind him being the vice president. Secondly, the great asset is the establishment, military establishment itself, Marwan. I mean, I was here on Friday and once in Medan al-Tahrir and in Giza, and once the tanks started to enter the Tahrir Square and different streets, they were greeted by everyone. They were given roses. So the military establishment is well respected in Egypt. People still believe that this is a national establishment which is committed to the nation. And so these are the two great assets on the side of General Suleiman and the establishment, if they wish to do so. And thirdly, you are offering them as a demonstrating street and a demonstrating society, you are offering them a safe transition. You are offering them a safe way out. Not the Ben Ali model, but a safe way out. Now, can he do it? Yes, he can do it. Are they committed? I'm not sure. But once again, here we need the pressures from the street, which are continuing, and we need you. I mean, as a government to government, and at the non-governmental level, I mean, to do what you can. I mean, they can be pushed as well. Secretary Clinton's statement yesterday on the elections, on that she expects that as a result, one of the results, what's going on, that there will be elections in Egypt soon. This was quite positive for everyone. So we need to see more of that, and we need to see more statements, and not a slow reaction, which basically sort of waits to see how it's going to. The struggle is going on. I'm using a militant language which I never used before in my life, but this is part of what's going on here. So it's going on, and it's a very fast pace. So they should not wait and see, unlike the Tunisia case.
Let's try to open it up and have a few questions. Saeed. I don't know. Do we have a microphone?
The microphone, or he won't.
Yes. Maybe we'll take a few questions before Amr has a chance to answer in the interest of time. Go ahead, Said.
Amr, real quick, I would just want to repeat one of the questions that Marwan asked about the sustainability of Mubarak and the sustainability of the regime. As it seems, the message that is coming clear and through that the demonstrators indeed will not accept anything less than the removal of Mubarak. So can you give us like a timetable?
Okay, other questions? Please.
Hello, Amr. It's Laura Marlowe from the Irish Times newspaper. We've read about demonstrators holding up tear gas canisters that say "Made in USA." There's been very little about. I've heard very little about anti-American feeling. Is it possible that it will become an anti-American movement the way the revolution did in Tehran? And secondly, you said people were impatient with the U.S., with the Obama administration. What would be the best possible course of events? What should the Obama administration do? What would be the honest response be?
Yes.
With all due respect, I cannot really hear the questions well. I guess.
Well, one
I
question.
hear you very well. I'm not hearing the.
All right. Sorry, Amr. One question had to do with the Mubarak regime, and once again, what do you think in terms of time? What time does the Mubarak regime has? And the other question had to do with whether this uprising is going to turn anti-American, which it hasn't so far, the way the Iranian Revolution did in '79. And what should the president do about it?
Right. Let me start by the second question. Just to give you a sense of what's going on. I mean, this is a non-ideological protest movement, which is nationwide. We have been demonstrating since Tuesday, and I haven't seen a single banner, or I haven't heard a single slogan, which I could describe as ideological. Not a single anti-American, not a single anti-Western, not a single anti-Israeli, and it's even not interested in what's happening around us. This is a very local, highly localized protest movement. People are interested in Egypt, are not against anyone, they are just against Mubarak, and even not as a person, but against autocracy and authoritarianism. This is what's going on. Now, is it going to turn anti-American? No, I do not expect it. Is it going to turn Islamist? No, it's not going to turn Islamist, because the street is well represented, and one of the great outcomes of what has been going on here in Egypt in the last day is that you really see we have been having a silent majority, and this silent majority, without exaggeration, has decided to do it its way. So it's not Islamist, it's not the Brotherhood, it's not a liberal WAB, it's not a liberal GAD. It is the silent majority which is really doing it right now. So I do not see that happening. The first question with regard to the time, it's as I said, a very fast pace. And I guess they measured the situation strategically wrong before Tuesday and before Friday. Until Friday, they were responding basically using the security apparatus. Now they are trying to contain the fast pace of the street. But if they are going to do it their way, primarily sort of giving promises which are not being materialized in procedures, in concrete procedures, dissolving the parliament, amending the constitution, so on and so forth, this is not going to stop the streets. It's a very fast pace, and it's a question of, to my mind, days and not weeks. Finally, what should the administration do? I guess they should talk with General Suleiman to ask him to do the following. I mean, form a national unity government. I'm afraid that this might be too late. The cabinet was just announced, and it's far away from being a national unity cabinet. Dissolve the parliament and call for presidential and parliamentary elections in 6 months, while giving the authorities of the People's Assembly and the Shura Council to a constitutional assembly to amend the constitution, not to draft a new constitution, but to amend the constitution, and to open up the political arena for parties and movements to contest the interests and loyalty of the street, because otherwise we will always have these parallel claims going on. Is the Baradi representative, is anyone else representative or not? So this is what we should do, and we should stick to a very concrete timeline. If not, this is not going to I guess, if they will not do it, this will only confirm the lack of credibility which the U.S. has been having due to its slowness in responding to Egyptian events, and before that, to Tunisian events.
Amr, thank you very much. We're going to let you go. Please stay safe and out of trouble. You're doing a great job. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Marwan. Give my best to everyone, and once again to Egyptian Americans and Arab Americans and in Arabic. يعني هي لحظة تحول رئيسية في تاريخ مصر، وأنا أعتقد إن إحنا بنحتاجكم ونحتاج مساعدتكم كلنا معانا بكل الصور الممكنة. فتحياتي، وخلي عندكم ثقة في شعب مصر العظيم كما كان عندنا جميعا ثقة في شعب تونس العظيم. تحياتي.
Thank you so much, Amr. Amr is just
My
saying...
pleasure, Marwan.
Thank you. Is just
Thank
saying
you very
that this
much.
is a transformational moment in Egypt's history. Obviously, he's feeling very, very emotional about all of this. Okay, that was Amr from Midan Tahrir. Now back to the studio and Michelle.
Okay, well, hard to I can't top the drama of Amar's, and he had some very interesting things to say. I mean, some questions that occur to me. There's this question of whether the Egyptian government, whether it means Mubarak or whether it means Omar Suleiman taking control, is going to be willing to negotiate some kind of a transition. They still seem to be in the mode of wanting to do the minimum and just to sort of top down, just to impose what they want to do rather than making this an inclusive process. But as Amr noted, there's still a problem with the opposition not being quite unified, and it's not entirely clear to what extent Mohammed al-Baradei, for example, can be the focal point. He's not the leader of the opposition, but can he at least be the person who's empowered to speak on their behalf with the government? That's another question. I think the political opposition in Egypt didn't start this whole thing. As Amr noted, it's very much a grassroots protest, and to what extent is it necessary for the formal political opposition to be involved in a national unity government or in negotiating with the Mubarak government? So I think that's going to be very interesting to see in the next couple of days. Just briefly, one last observation on U.S. policy. And what this means. I mean, we all know, there are a lot of implications for U.S. interests in peace in the region, security interests, and so forth. But beyond that, just to merely look at these issues of democratization and so forth, I think, what we have seen in this uprising in Egypt is an utter failure of the agenda of kind of top-down reform in the region. The U.S. has failed to push it effectively, and governments, certainly including Egypt's government, have failed to do it effectively. And so what we've seen now is, instead of top-down reform, you get bottom-up change. I hope it's not. It doesn't have to go that way in every country in the region, and I hope that we'll learn some lessons from that about being a little bit more serious about engaging with governments in the region about reforms that are really meaningful and not cosmetic, because, we see now that there's a price to pay.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Maybe I'll start with this last point and very quickly try to draw some lessons from this crisis as they apply to other Arab countries. And I have a few of them that I will state quickly. The first lesson, in my opinion, is it's not just the economy stupid. It's very clear that this is not an economic crisis, that while it has been triggered by the economy, obviously there are more structural underlying themes, primarily that of governance. It is about governance. It is about the low quality of governance in Egypt, in Tunisia. And this is the first lesson, I think, that the rest of the Arab countries need to draw. You cannot address this through economic means. You cannot address this through raising salaries, through reducing prices, and hope that by itself this is going to result in any calming down of emotions across the Arab world. This is about governance primarily, in my view. And this is why while I think most advisors in the Arab world today are saying we are not Tunisia, we don't have to worry, our circumstances are different. I don't agree with that at all. Yes, every country is different, but yes, also every country is the same, in that there is an underlying theme, that a common thread that, if you want, joins all of the region together, which is that of governance. And this is an issue that I hope other Arab countries would take note from and start to address the governance issue and not just the economic problem. The third lesson is this bread before freedom argument did not work. Okay, this is the argument that was put forward by most, if not all, Arab countries. Let's, feed people's stomachs. Let people feel good economically, and then once they do that, they will, take the wise and reasonable political choices once we open up the political space. What bread before freedom has done, basically, is economic liberalization without a system of checks and balances, which has, in almost every Arab country, increased corruption. People today, because of the global financial crisis, also are saying, well, if the pie is smaller, please don't take, more of it than you have in the past. This is just simply unacceptable. And that is, I think, sort of the death of the economic liberalization or reform before political reform. Unless the two are done together, I don't think the Arab world, will see a bright future. And so what is needed, in my view, is not less economic liberalization, but rather more political reform to go ahead with such liberalization. Lesson number 4 is this argument that, keeping the systems closed will keep the Islamists out. The scare tactic of using the Islamists has also been undermined. One, it's not the Islamists who are leading this demonstration, if anybody is leading this demonstration. It is the middle class, both in Tunisia and in Egypt. Clearly, it is regular Egyptians and Tunisians, protesting the low quality of governance. Yes, Islamists might make use of this, but I don't think that in today's age you can afford to ignore the Islamists, who are a major political force, who, if they are pursuing their means through peaceful means, as for example they have been in Egypt, in Tunisia, in Jordan, and other places in the Arab world, then they should be part of the game. And I think regarding Egypt, if a national unity government is not formed that includes the Islamists, I don't think that it will be seen as a credible process towards political reform. Lesson number 5, the political elite in the Arab world has argued for decades that they need to do reform, if at all, at their own pace, that there is no hurry. The street is not protesting. Things are not that bad. The reformers' basically demands for reform are just exaggerated. There are special circumstances in each country that stand against a quick pace of reform, and therefore, we should take it at a very slow pace. Well, that argument has been undermined as well. You don't have the luxury of sort of waiting forever. We did actually, for decades, the Arab world did seem to have that luxury. People, yes, did not go out in the street, but once again, as Tunisia has shown, you never know what sparks people to go out on the street. What has happened today or in the last few weeks in the Arab world, I think, in my view, is irreversible from that point of view. That the old guard, those who are standing against reform, can no longer use this argument that we need to follow reform or have reform at our own pace. That argument simply has lost all credibility. And the last point I want to make is with regard to the U.S. I mean, in my view, the U.S. has played catch-up for a very long time. For decades, it either ignored reform completely or tried to impose it from the outside in a way that did not take the region's circumstances into consideration. Both ways, reform has not been high on the priority list of the U.S., and now it's catching up with Egypt. Egypt is probably too late. I don't think whatever the U.S. does now in Egypt is probably irrelevant in the short run. But I hope that the U.S. Will do it right in other countries of the world before it is too late, and in insisting on a credible reform process. The argument that reform has to be homegrown, which is an argument I totally agree with, has unfortunately been used by many countries in the Arab world to do either little or nothing on reform. And I think that it is about time that the U.S. Really engages with countries of the region, not to impose reform, but at least to support it, and support a credible and a gradual but a serious reform process rather than ad hoc programs that don't add up in the end to any power sharing and any sort of system of checks and balances. Thank you. And I'll
Okay, let me pick up from the last point about the sort of the complacency of the Arab leadership, about the sort of the passivity of the public. I was in Egypt about close to a year ago, and I was talking to some of the members of the leadership of the National Democratic Party. And I got the message very consistently from everybody I talked to. Number one, Egyptians are not rebellious people. Egyptians are docile and so on. And that was literally in those terms I heard. And second, the military and the security forces have a game plan. And we were talking about the succession from Mubarak at that point. They have a game plan and the situation will be contained. There is no problem. We have, everything is under control. So there are surprises in this life. What I want to talk about is the issue of where is the leadership coming from in the next step? Because what we have seen both in Tunisia and in Egypt, the fact that these protest movements can be extremely effective if people get angry enough, and frankly, nobody knows what's going to trigger it. But if people get angry enough, these protest movements, with their networking, with the way they are operating, they are extremely effective in bringing people out and tearing down the regime. The question is, what is the next step? Who can take the leadership of this movement? Because we have to keep in mind that in this that you can have a bottom-up revolt, but in the end, reform always comes from the top. It's not necessarily the older regime, but there has to be a group of leaders, essentially, that negotiated the reform, that implemented the reform. Reform cannot come from the street. And the problem now is what we are seeing is a very thinly populated ranks of people who can take on the leadership. This is true in Egypt, and this is true in Tunisia. We are now 6 weeks into the uprising in Tunisia. I don't think we should call it a revolution because it remains to be seen how much change it's going to bring about. We are well 6 weeks into the uprising. There is not a single name that has come out in that country of leaders emerging from the ranks of the opposition. This is a movement that has no leaders. It's much earlier in Egypt to see what's happening, but right now what we are seeing is the protester rallying very half-heartedly behind El-Baradei just because there is nobody else. And we have not heard any glowing endorsement of El-Baradei. El-Baradei has disappointed even his supporters, his early supporters, because there was a sense that he was not active enough, that he was expecting, to be served on a silver platter the possibility of running for the presidency, that he was not getting his hands dirty in the streets, and he only came back, he was out of the country much of the time, and he came back only after the uprising started. But because there is no sort of, for lack of better alternatives, they are rallying around him. And anybody who knows something about Egyptian politicians and who saw the interviews with El-Baradei yesterday, the people standing next to him were some very old faces in Egyptian politics. In other words, there is not much a sign of renewal there. What do we know about this protest movement in Egypt? And I'd like to call attention to a paper that when things were slightly quieter, Amr and I put together. We had been working on the study on the protest movements in the Arab world for a while, and we have put together what we knew at that point. It was not a complete exhaustive report, but we put together what we knew. And there are, in Egypt, as elsewhere, there are three different strands of the protest movement. There has been a labor, and that is why tomorrow is a very crucial day, and I'll explain why. The three strands are, one is kind of the liberal youth movement, and this is the one that has brought people out in the streets. It's more of a middle-class movement. The very fact that they are all online and they are all on Twitter and Facebook and so on tells you something about the social background of these young people who are behind the movement. They have refused any formal organization. In fact, we had a very interesting meeting a few months ago with a representative of protest movements. The meeting was in Beirut, and it turned into a furious discussion at one point between the representatives of the youth movements and the representative of the old opposition on this issue of organizing online. Because the youth was saying this is the best way to organize. You cannot be caught, essentially. It's a network. It's not, the government cannot dismantle it. And the people, sort of the more traditional opposition movements, most of them come from a leftist background, essentially say, no, you have to have an organization, you have to have structure, and so on and so forth. Well, what we have seen now is the limitation, both the strength and the limitation of what the youth movement can do. They can bring people out, and then what? They themselves know, if you look at some of the interviews that have been taking place, that they have to hand over the leadership to somebody else. It's not the 20 years old that are going to have credibility in negotiating with Mubarak, in negotiating with the military, and so on. So that's one of the components of the movement. The second component has been the labor movement, labor protest. And this, I'm very bad at remembering numbers, but essentially there have been literally hundreds and escalating every year of labor protest, illegal strikes not sanctioned by the labor union, sit-ins in the workplace, and so on. This has been an escalating process, not only in Egypt, but in much of the Arab world. And in many cases, particularly in Egypt, this labor protest tried to focus exclusively on economic grievances. There was a real attempt not to turn the economic grievances into political grievances, because they knew that as long as they kept it on the economic level, the government was following a policy of appeasement, so that they did increase salaries. That many of these were state-owned enterprises where they were striking. The government did react by increasing salaries. They knew that the moment they started pushing forth political demands, they would get crushed, essentially, so they avoided it. And then the third strand was the Muslim Brotherhood. And the Muslim Brotherhood, there we have a different trajectory. Instead of getting stronger, it seemed to be getting somewhat weaker in recent years. They really, in Egypt at least, they reached the height of their influence with the 2005 elections, when they got hold of 20% of the cabinet. And then the government cracked down on them, and they have been, and one of the results of the crackdown is that then you started having internal dissension in the Muslim Brotherhood about the tactics that they should be following. Were the policies right? Were they right to run for elections, where in the end the government just tried to destroy the organization and so on? So you have these three different strands, and what many of the discussion that we had with Amr in trying to analyze this situation, our conclusion was that not much was going to happen in Egypt until the three movements came together. And if the three movements ever converged, then the government would be in serious trouble. And I think this seems to be what is happening. The reason why I say tomorrow is crucial is that they have not called, what has been called for is not just a big demonstration, is a general strike. And that's going to give us some sense of whether the three parts are coming together. That said, even if they come together, very clearly the leadership is not there. There is something somewhat frightening about the idea that is this going to be, is it al-Baradei who is going to be negotiate with the regime? That does not seem to be anybody else. And I leave it at that because I'm sure there are a lot of questions.
Okay, let's open it up, please. If you can just identify yourself, please, and keep it short because I know there are a lot of questions and we don't have much time. Oops. Microphone here. Manar.
My name is Mohammed Al-Shinnawi, the Voice of America. Egypt uprising leaves Washington torn between freedom-seeking protesters and a government that has been a vital ally. How should the United States face this dilemma with deep implications for its troubled Middle East policies?
Okay, let's take a few questions. David.
David Mack, Middle East Institute. I want to congratulate both of you and Michelle for the very sort of cool, objective approach that you've had to this. I'm going to give Amr a pass because I have been a demonstrator in Midan al-Tahrir, one back in my student days, and I know it's all too easy to be swept away by euphoria. But I think you're right, pointing to the danger of this leaderless type of movement. And my question is there a particular move by the U.S. government which might cause the, at least the students and intellectuals in the streets of Cairo and wherever to approach things a little more cautiously and methodically, do a little bit of organizing themselves, rather than just calling for all the old regime to leave, which hasn't gotten them very far in Tunis, for example. Or is the U.S. standing among people like that so low at this point that it might have the other effect, and anything the U.S. does would just anger the people all the more?
Is there a woman? No. No, you asked the... Well, Ziad, then no women want to ask questions.
Thank you both. I think there's been a perceptible change in American policy as far as we can get from political statements now, with the United States not standing either with the street or with Mubarak. It is likely that this is a concession to reality, that Mubarak is finished. The question is how to do it. The public in Egypt has lost its fear of the government. Now the question is whether the military and security leadership will lose its fear of its own leader and have a little bit of a conversation with him where he would be let out in a dignified way, and the army will avoid a confrontation with the public and thus retain its moral authority. Do you think that scenario is possible?
Well, all the questions seem to be somewhat related. My view, I'm sure Marina would like to also comment on this. My own view is these things, if you judge from history, take the same route. I mean, I think the Mubarak regime is finished. Whether Mr. Mubarak leaves the scene tomorrow or leaves it in 6 months is besides the point at this stage. What I think is starting to happen is a transitional process. How orderly is this transitional process? Will leaders emerge? Will there be a national sort of consensus on the way ahead? Is something that is still too early to tell. But I don't think that it is possible for President Mubarak to stay after all what has been done. Now, what can the U.S. do about it? Again, in my view, regarding Egypt, very little. I mean, you don't build credibility in one day. You're not, behind the curve for years, and then you make a couple of statements and hope that people will listen to what you are saying. I don't think, frankly, the Egyptians are listening to whatever the U.S. is saying today. There is no history of at least supporting reform, not trying to impose it once again, but supporting reform. Mohammed just mentioned the issue about, Egypt being a very reliable ally, which is very true, but it's finished. You cannot keep making this argument. Whether it has been a reliable ally or not is besides the point, because that ally has lost all credibility among its people, and it makes no sense, even in political terms, to continue to sort of, support the ally. You can support a transitional process, and I hope that is what the U.S. is doing. Support a transitional process that would lead to a transition of power in an orderly manner. What I'm worried about is what the U.S. will do with other Arab countries. I think, with Egypt, it missed the boat. Okay, it missed the boat on Egypt. What is important now is not to miss the boat with other Arab countries, not to repeat the same mistake and say we're either going to, continue to support Arab regimes regardless of their record on governance, or else we might be faced with vacuum. If you do that, you will be faced with vacuum. And as we have seen, the Egyptians, the Tunisians have now trouble finding out alternative leaderships. But that trouble is partly because the regimes themselves have not allowed the political space for political parties to emerge and produce leaders. It's a catch-22, and you're never going to sort of break out of this. At any rate, the street has, helped, hurt, however you want to look at it, has helped you break out of this. And now the street has changed the rules of the game, so that in the future, I think, it shouldn't be a black or white policy option. Either I support, blindly regimes that have a low quality of governance, or I also support revolutions, or or in an unorderly way. I think there should be a place in between where the United States will work with governments, but this time to produce a credible reform process. And frankly, I don't know whether Arab governments, have drawn the right lessons and are capable of doing so. Maybe some are, maybe some are not. What I do think is that this is basically a last chance. Either they do it right, or they face more uprisals than just in Egypt. Marina.
Okay, I'll focus just about the issue in Egypt. The United States is largely a spectator at this point. I don't think there is anything that the United States can do that's going to change the course of what is happening now. I think for the United States, it's more a question of how it preserves its long-term relationship with the country, with whoever is going to come to be running the government now. It seems to me that the only U.S. has to come off the fence. It has been sitting on the fence. If you have been listening to Hillary Clinton yesterday, yes, we support the protesters, but we also support the government. Well, you cannot do both when they are a loggerhead with each other. I mean, you have to make a choice. And I think the only position the U.S. can take is to call for a government of national unity. I think that's the way to essentially to sit on the fence in a constructive way, because in the end we know that there has to be a process of negotiations. They have to come together. There has to be some compromise, and we should be very clear about this. I refer you to the article on the New York Times this morning, the Washington Post, Karen DeYoung's article that talks about explaining, where a spokesperson for the State Department explaining the subtle change in the wording of the declaration and the use of the word transition. I am sure that that with all due respect to diplomats in the room or former diplomats in the room, I'm sure that they understand, maybe they understand the difference. I'm sure those crowds in Tahrir Square don't have an inkling about what that change of wording means. So I think there has to be a clear position in terms of a government of national unity. The point that you raised, I think it's very interesting because I think there is no doubt that in the end the military is the one that is going to play a pivotal role. Somebody has to reestablish some sort of order in the country. I mean, economically, the country is going to fall apart if this does not happen. People are terrified in the neighborhoods about what's happening and so on. There is only one. The question is which part of the military is going to take over? Who in the military is going to take over? Because so far, the military has been backing Mubarak. And the question, and I don't think they can reestablish control unless they stop backing Mubarak. In other words, if they ditch him, if they make it clear that it's time for him to leave, because otherwise the crowds will not stop demonstrating. And then the only way the army can impose order is at Tiananmen Square. And, God forbid that should happen, but essentially the only way that you can reestablish order in that country is after Mubarak has stepped down and some sort of government of some sort of committee, some sort of government of national unity, whatever has been put together.
Okay. Let's get some people from the back, please.
You have a woman right here. You are looking for one.
I'm desperately looking for a woman. No, go ahead, please.
Jessica Matthews, Carnegie Endowment. I wonder where this goes from here. In particular, the countries that we keep hearing about, other dominoes, are Sunni countries. And so I wonder, is this a Sunni wave? And then the other point is, I wonder what it feels like in Iran to have been somebody who was in the streets a year ago, and whether you think that this effects of this may touch Iran as well.
The woman, yes, please. We'll have an all-women questions.
Hi, Danya Greenfield with the Center for International Private Enterprise. There seems to be consensus that U.S. policy has been lackluster, to say the least, but I'm curious about U.S. efforts to support democracy assistance on a civil society to civil society basis, whether or not the efforts supported by USAID and MAPI and DRL have been effective at all, have helped contribute to this, have been on the sidelines and have not really played a role here. Groups like NDI and SIPE and NDI and IRI and Internews and IFAS, all of these efforts that have been going on for decades, what has been the effect of that?
Katie, over here.
Thank you, Kate Seeley, Middle East Institute. Two quick questions, one from Marwan, specifically regarding Jordan and the impact of the change on Jordan. Do you think, where we've seen many protests, do you expect King Abdullah to respond to the demands on the part of the people to change Rifai, the prime minister, and to consider an elected prime minister? So what impact will this have on Jordan, which is also facing similar protests? And Marina, a lot of talk on Gulf 2000 about the parallels between Egypt today and Iran in 1979, where, of course, you had a coalition of parties demand change and reform, only to have the leftists and the socialists quashed by the Islamists. A lot of fear here in the States that the Muslim Brotherhood will emerge as the dominant voice in Egypt. Is that possible, or is this just, fear-mongering here?
Okay, quickly. To Jessica's question, I don't think this is a Sunni wave. It is striking that countries like Iran and Syria, we haven't seen anything yet. And once again, countries are different, which means not everybody is going to react in the same way. But I don't think it's because of a Sunni wave. Bashar Assad yesterday had a very interesting statement in which he said Syria will, go for political reform, which means that, he's not unaware of what is going on in the rest of the region. In Iran, it already happened last year. I mean, it's unfortunate that the regime cracked with, with a big force, but it's already happening in Iran. In fact, they have, in a way, sort of gone ahead of the Sunnis in protesting what is going on. I hope I will not sound harsh with regard to democracy assistance, but I have to be honest, having been on the other side in government, these programs do very little. Very little. They give the facade of democracy being supported, while in fact they are, in my view, so far, no more than ad hoc programs that don't add up to, a solid process that leads in the end to not just liberalization, but to power sharing, to a system of checks and balances. So far, they have not done that. I think both the U.S. and Arab governments have played the game. The U.S. saying, this is to help democracy, and Arab states saying, yes, we have programs to help democracy. If you look at almost every single one of them, I do not think that they have done so. In my view, the issue is not about money as much as about a political will to do things differently. This is not about, a training program here or an awareness program there. This is about a process by which the political establishments in the Arab world commit to opening up the system in a serious manner that would result in power sharing. That means strong parliaments, that means, an independent judiciary, that means true freedom of the press. You do it in a gradual manner, certainly. No one is looking for, revolutions that have not worked anyway in the Arab world. So you need to do it in a gradual manner, but gradual must mean serious. And gradual doesn't mean a snail, type pace, as has been the case before. And I would certainly revisit all these programs and focus more on the political discussions that are going on between the U.S. and countries of the region, rather than give the illusion that by giving such money, the U.S. is helping the cause of democracy in the region. And to the last question on Jordan, once again, this is not about a change of government only. I mean, the king might very well change the government. I'm not going to predict whether that will happen or not. But it's not about a change of government. It's about a change of course. And that means that it must also involve what we have talked about in other countries of the region. A national unity government, in my view, that would include all the political forces, including the Muslim Brotherhood, a commitment to change the election law so that you do, come up with a strong parliament that will end up, as the Constitution states, that will, end up really sharing power in the country, a government of reformers, because in the Arab world, what has been tried is either reform without reformers, or in few cases, reformers without reform. Well, both don't work. If reform is to work, you need to bring reformers and a program, and do it in a sustained manner over a long period of time. This is what needs to be done, I don't think just in Jordan, but across the Arab world as well, and I hope that Arab leaders are drawing the right lessons from what has happened in Egypt and Tunisia.
Okay, very quickly on the, most Arab countries are Sunni countries, so that essentially it's bound, just on the law of statistics, there are bound to be more the Sunni regimes affected than other regimes. I totally agree with Marwan on the issue of U.S. democracy assistance in this kind of countries. Let me point out that Egypt was particularly close to organizations like NDI and IRI and IFEX. They just have not had even a chance to be players there. But it's the form of organization, small NGOs, that is really much more suitable to put pressure on the government in a democratic system that to bring about a change. So I think it's in this situation, the data assistance is really not very useful. Concerning the possibility of the quote-unquote hijacking of the movement by the Muslim Brotherhood, which is, frankly, they have as much a right to be there as anywhere else. But the question is, what is the strength of the Muslim Brotherhood at this point? And I think we know that they are better organized than the secular parties at this point. The secular opposition parties essentially are disastrous. The WAFT party, the Tagamo, they're practically non-existent in terms of organization. The Muslim Brotherhood has shown a capacity when it has participated in elections to do something. They have an organization and so on. Do they have the support of the majority of the population? It's very doubtful. There is a lot of opposition to the Muslim Brotherhood, and it seems to me that the way to decrease the chances of the Muslim Brotherhood coming out in a very strong position is to open up the formation of political parties. I mean, one of the real mistakes that the Mubarak regime has done is to crack down on all opposition, even the least dangerous of all opposition. I mean, I can't imagine anybody being afraid of the WAFT party, with all due respect. I mean, it's not a dangerous organization, but they kept even these parties from organizing. And the way in which you make it less likely that anybody will come to dominate the outcome is to really to open it up and have as many voices as possible, and not to try and repress everybody, which is what the government has been doing.
Said, we have to give a chance to everybody else. I'm sorry, but go ahead. It's a lot of questions. Okay, and then you, sir.
Yes, I would like you to continue a little on your basic suggestion of looking beyond Egypt. And when I consider the prospects for U.S. policy urging a brisker pace in real reform, it seems to me it could be feasible with the exception of the Saudis. I wonder what Saudi-American relations, in your view, would look like in, let us say that 12 months from now, Egypt is under a new government, and that from the U.S. point of view, things have not turned out so badly, and the U.S. is pressing the Saudis to change. How would you envision this?
Okay. Yes, sir.
Judd Harriet, documentary filmmaker. I'd like to hear your views on the future of the three most important initiatives in U.S. foreign policy: the war on terror, the Egyptian-Israeli peace treaty, and the Palestinian-Israeli question, the negotiations to a Palestinian settlement. Would these three initiatives, or do they resonate with those forces that are now on the street? Is there any future to them, in your view?
Okay. One more question? Yes, please.
Whatever happened to the Gamma Islamiyah? I mean, these were very, very hardcore extremists. They tried to assassinate Mubarak. They massacred tourists. Are they completely gone? And is there a danger that they'll crop up in the midst of this chaos?
Shall we start with you?
Okay, I'll do that. Well, 12 months from now, it's a century, right? But let me just address the issue. The Saudis have been extremely resilient in adapting themselves to new situations. I mean, we have this view of the Saudis, and they are essentially very conservative, very stay in what they are doing. They have also taken very interesting, they have been the leading force in trying to the sort of rapprochement with Syria to try to make peace, try to establish a modus vivendi between Hariri and Hezbollah and so on and so forth. So I think what we have seen is a Saudi Arabia that, for all its conservatism, essentially, also has some capacity to adapt to the situation. The big question is that we don't know what the leadership is, because King Abdullah has been perhaps more open to reform than a lot of other people. How much longer is King Abdullah going to be there? I mean, and who's going to be the next one? I think we are coming to a point in the Saudi Arabia where all the criminology about who is coming next has to defer about who dies first, almost at this point, so that we really don't know where it's going. But it seems to me that we should not underestimate the capacity of Saudi Arabia to adapt itself to the situation. Concerning Jamaat Islamiyah, I think they have. I don't think they are major players in this. I don't think you can ever say, they are gone forever. There are not going to be any more acts of terrorism. There are not going to be any terrorist movements. But I think there has been a combination of a rethinking of the position on the part of the leadership and a lot of repression on the part of the government, so that we have not seen them as being particularly active now. I think the real actors, the Muslim Brothers are a much more important actor, I think, than Jamaat Islamiyah is. Very briefly on the issue of the impact on the initiatives, on the war on terror, on the Egyptian-Israeli peace treaty, on the peace process. There is no doubt that if Egypt becomes more democratic, the population of Egypt is not terribly friendly to Israel. Okay, there has never been an uprising or an upsurge of support for the peace treaty. There are very strong Palestinian sentiments and so on. That said, somehow I doubt, barring the worst case scenario that sometimes the State Department seems to have in mind, that is that of a takeover by radical Islamists, I doubt very much that the foreign policy of Egypt is going to change in the near future. I doubt very much that any government coming to power at this time with the kind of domestic issues that they are facing is going to choose to go back on the peace treaty with Israel as the first thing they go. Very frankly, I don't think that would make much a difference. You may see differences in terms of the reopening of the border with Gaza, for example, and so on, but I don't think we are going to see a big overall change of direction. It seems to me very unlikely.
Let me respond, and then I have to leave at 9:45, unfortunately, for another appointment. But I think Marina can stay till 10, right, Marina?
If there are questions, I'll stay.
If there are questions. On Saudi Arabia, look, I don't mean, and I hope my comments did not imply that the U.S. should be the principal driver for this reform process. I mean, there are things that the U.S. can do. There are things that the U.S. cannot do. And the U.S. can work with countries in varying degrees, okay? And maybe, the U.S. ability to work with the Saudis on reform might be smaller than its ability with other Arab countries. The thing to note, in my view, is the lessons to be drawn should primarily be drawn by the Arab countries themselves rather than by the U.S. Because as we have seen in Egypt, whatever the U.S. views on Egypt was, in the end did not matter, once people went out in the street. The argument in the Arab world, in my view, should be, either this is a reform process led by Arab governments in an orderly way, or they can watch it be led for them in the street. But the status quo of expecting things to be static and for power to be absolute forever is clearly not sustainable anymore. That is the lesson to be drawn, and it must be drawn by principally Arab countries themselves. Then the U.S. can come in and help. The U.S. can help at least by, like I said, supporting a reform process, but supporting a credible reform process, rather than what in my view was a facade of everybody playing a game. Arab countries playing the game that they are reforming, and the U.S. playing the game that they are supporting this reform process. That has not worked. And from now on, I hope everybody will learn the lesson that this needs to be, as I said, a credible, sustained, gradual, and serious reform process moving ahead. With regard to the Egyptian and the Palestinian peace treaty, I agree with Marina. Whereas any government emerging in Egypt probably will be less warm, if you want, in its relationships with Israel, but to take it to the point of abrogating the Egyptian-Israeli peace treaty, I don't think is an option that anybody is looking at in Egypt. I do not expect that will happen at all. Egypt might not, let's say, be as forthcoming in supporting the peace initiatives that are going on right now, but frankly, is there a peace process going on right now, or are we simply going through the motions? And if we are going through the motions, as I think we are, it doesn't matter whether Egypt is going to support it or not. There is no serious peace process going on to start with that we should be afraid of abandoning if a new government comes to Egypt. The last point I want to make, and I made it in the Washington Post today, and I'll make it again. This is not about Israel, okay? And I think Arab publics, justifiably, in my view, are get mad every time something happens there, that the U.S. seems to look at this from the prism of its relationships with Israel. This is about corruption. This is about governance. And for once, Arab publics would like the U.S. to look at it from that angle, rather than from the angle of the U.S.-Israeli relationships every single time. It is a very important relationship, I agree. But I mean, for once, Arab publics would like the U.S. to just, look at it as it is, a movement about governance and about corruption. Thank you very much. I truly have to go.
Is it about young Arabs reclaiming their dignity? I heard Rob Manning the other day say that young Arabs have had it with their trampled upon dignity,
Well, it's
peace processes. Is this all about reclaiming Arab dignity?
It's not all about, but let's remember the Arab world is young in age. I mean, 70% of the Arab world is under 30 years of age. So obviously, the young are playing a very important role in this. But I wouldn't say it's just the young. I think everybody is sort of fed up with the low quality of governance. The fact is, most of these people are young because of the makeup of the population, not just in Egypt, but across the Arab world.
Okay. Thank you, Marwan. This is beginning to look like the farewell symphony, so that if you are interested, I can stay for a little longer. Before I forget, though, I want to announce that on Thursday morning, we are going to have, most of you should have received an invitation to a meeting that was originally supposed to discuss the changes in the character of the Egyptian press. We had two visitors from Egypt that were supposed to come. We do not know if they'll arrive. Whether or not they come, the meeting is going to be held, and it's going to be an update on the situation in Egypt. Lunchtime, yes, thank you very much. 12:15, right? The meeting is at 12:15. So there will be a meeting essentially to further discuss the situation in Egypt. We'll send out a reminder today, and it's going to be much broader than what was originally announced. And we are going to be very flexible in terms of what we'll focus on, because it really depends on events and depends on whether the visitors come. Okay, I'll reopen the floor. And there is a question here. We'll wait for you and back there. Yeah, the gentleman here. And yeah, yes.
Is it on? Yes, good. My name is Yaya Fanusi. I'm with United States Africa 2017 project, and I am the lead person for the Special Operations Divisions. I was here December 15. Marina did a great job, and the other people in the panel. And I made a statement. I said, in view of all that you've said, do you see a popular uprising happening? Because from our view, what's going to happen in Africa and North Africa very soon is an uprising against the political class. That was my statement. The only solution they have in Egypt is for a transition government to come in and ensure that there are free and fair elections, which I said the last time. That's what will have to happen. Free and fair elections.
Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Ardaway. My name is Ed Geyer. I'm from George Mason University. I wanted to know what your thoughts are on the sort of decentralized structure of the opposition right now and how they're mobilized, whereas in the past, more hierarchical organized opposition has been either co-opted or targeted by the regime. Can a decentralized structure now have advantages in that the regime would have to respond by sort of expanding civil rights and civil liberties and becoming more inclusive on a citizenship basis as opposed to organizational? Thanks.
Yeah. Okay, let me... The first one was a statement I don't think I have to address. Concerning this decentralized structure, I think we are, as I said earlier, we are seeing both the strength of those decentralized structures and the weaknesses. And the strength is that they are very difficult to repress. You know, if you have an organization, a network without a head, it's very difficult for the government to destroy it. And they are very good at bringing people out. Let me point out that we are exaggerating the impact of social media. Revolutions have taken place historically without the help of social media, but certainly they played an important role there. The problem is that these networks are not in a position to negotiate now. They are not in a position to engage in a sustained dialogue with the government, because you need people, you need leaders in order to do that. So there are both sides, both sides of the, both the strength and the weakness there. That's all. Okay, I think we are coming to the end. Okay, there are two publications. From the last couple of days, they are out on the table. One is this paper that Amr Hamzawi and I wrote on the protest movements and political change in the Arab world, which is based on a year of research, essentially, that was still unfinished, but we decided we better publish what we had before it, because I think it's relevant to what is going on. And the second one is the paper by Marwan Muasher called The Arab World in Crisis, Redefining Arab Moderation, and both of them are out there on the table. And thank you very much for coming.